So let's start by looking at the anatomy of the sympathetic division. First of all, your preganglionic neurons originate in the thoracolumbar spinal cord. We've mentioned this earlier, so that's T1 to L2. Right, so this area in green here. The fibers of the sympathetic division of the entire body only arise between T1 to L2. They're going to come specifically from the lateral horn of the spinal cord, and some fibers to a lesser degree come from the intermediolateral cell column, right, which is just adjacent to the lateral horn. So this is the area of the spinal cord where these fibers arise from. In terms of the anatomy of these neurons, the preganglionic neuron is going to be a shorter neuron, right? And it's going to synapse onto this structure here, which is called the sympathetic chain. Okay, the sympathetic chain, just like what the name sounds like, or just like what the name implies, is a collection of sympathetic ganglia, right? A collection of autonomic ganglia on the sympathetic side. So these fibers that leave T1 to L2 will then synapse onto the autonomic ganglia, which we just mentioned, so that's this ganglia. And if we took a collection of these ganglia, this is what forms the sympathetic chain. So the sympathetic chain is essentially nothing but a collection of the autonomic ganglia on the sympathetic side, okay? And they form this chain structure, which is right adjacent to the spinal cord. In terms of the anatomy in the body, if you were to open up the thoracic cavity, remove the heart, the lungs, and look at the posterior abdominal wall, you'd see two long nervous extensions running down adjacent to the spinal cord. This is your sympathetic chain. A lot of students think that this is something abstract. This is an actual structure in the body, the sympathetic chain, okay? And it's nothing but all of these autonomic ganglia, which are connected together in a chain. And because the sympathetic chain is right next to the spinal cord, that first neuron, the preganglionic neuron, is going to be much shorter on the sympathetic side. So in the sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neurons are very short. They have a very short distance to go to synapse onto that sympathetic chain. All right. Alternatively, the postganglionic neuron, which is that second neuron that leaves the ganglia, is a much longer neuron. You can see sort of schematically represented in this image that these neurons are much longer, and they travel to various effector tissues that we've mentioned already. They can go to the lacrimal glands in the eye. They can go to the salivary glands. They can go to the lungs, to the heart, the liver, and so on and so forth. And because of the anatomy of moving from the sympathetic chain out to all of these different target organs, these neurons have to be much longer. Right? Okay. Now, let's look at the route of communication between the spinal cord and that effector tissue. Oops, I think okay. So what we just described was the general anatomy of the sympathetic nervous system, right? We have fibers leaving from T1 to L2, synapsing onto the sympathetic chain, and then that second neuron synapsing onto the effector tissue. Now, there are two exceptions to that general anatomy. Right? There are two exceptions to that general anatomy. We can have fibers leave the spinal cord, and then they can synapse onto a ganglia that is not a part of the sympathetic chain. This we call a collateral ganglia. All right, a collateral ganglia. And there are several types of collateral ganglia that are located in the abdomen, located throughout the gastrointestinal organs. And these are not a part of the sympathetic chain. Okay, the second exception to that general anatomy is the adrenal medulla. All right. Now, let's sort of backtrack here and talk about the anatomy of the adrenals. So the adrenals are two glands They sit just on top of your kidneys, right? So they're paired on either side. And they have two parts to them. So there's the cortex, which is responsible for secreting steroids. And then there's the medulla. The medulla is the inside of that adrenal. And this is responsible for secreting your catecholamines, right? Norepinephrine, epinephrine, and a small amount of dopamine. So within this adrenal, the center of the adrenal, which is much darker staining, which you can see here, secretes your epinephrine, norepinephrine. And as a result, your preganglionic neurons will synapse onto the cells of the adrenal medulla. These are called chromaffin cells. So as you can see here, a nervous fiber or neuron, the preganglionic neuron, will leave the spinal cord, travel out to the adrenal medulla, travel to these chromaffin cells, synapse onto the chromaffin cells, and the chromaffin cells are really nothing but a neuron in a cell form, right? They act just like postganglionic neurons, right? When we synapse a preganglionic neuron onto a chromaffin cell, it will release its contents just the way a postganglionic neuron would. Alrighty? In fact, scientists have taken chromaffin cells and put them in special medium, and they actually begin to grow axons the way a neuron would. So a chromaffin cell is simply a postganglionic neuron, but it's in a cell form. Okay? Any questions? So these are the two exceptions to the general anatomy that we saw. Alrighty? So, if we look at this image, we'll see those three routes of communication that we just talked about. Right? That first route of communication was synapsing from the spinal cord onto your sympathetic chain and then out onto some type of effector tissue. The second route of communication was synapsing onto a chromaffin cell in the adrenal medulla. And then that chromaffin cell would act like a postganglionic neuron and release a norepinephrine, epinephrine, and a small amount of dopamine. And the third route of communication was synapsing onto a ganglia that was not a part of the sympathetic chain, and this we call a collateral ganglia. All right, this is very important, understanding the three routes of communication of the sympathetic division of the nervous system, of the autonomic nervous system. Right? Now, obviously, the most common and the most important is going to be the straight synapse between the preganglionic neuron, the sympathetic chain, and the effector tissue. This is the most common route of communication.